Sen Gupta, this is Global Order. I wonder why I haven't done this before, but we talk so much about international relations and hard power, soft power. But the one thing in all these days I've never talked about is the soft power of Indian cricket, perhaps the most potent and powerful soft power tool that India possesses as the fifth largest economy in the world. Today seems like a particularly pertinent day to discuss this because, of course, India has just won, after more than a decade, a major ICC tournament. It has won the T20 World Cup. And I was wondering who I could talk about this to. And I remembered that my friend Nikhil Mehra, the Supreme Court lawyer, is only Supreme Court lawyer like Batman during the day. In fact, he's perhaps far more engaged as a really passionate cricket aficionado who tracks cricket with great passion, great diligence, and I would say he's one of those authoritative figures analyzing Indian cricket. So I requested Nikhil if you would come and discuss this with me. I like cricket, but nowhere close to how much Nikhil likes cricket. And he was just the right person to discuss what's going on with Indian cricket and what its soft power really means today. Nikhil, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Indo. This is going to be fun. It's a topic I can speak off the top of my head. I don't have to prepare for it.
That's right. Nikhil, let me begin by talking a little bit about what happened yesterday. After a decade or so, India won a major ICC tournament. It won the T20 World Cup, a short format form of cricket. It won this at a time when all kinds of crazy things are happening in the world of cricket. Afghanistan cricket team, with the backing of an Indian coach and Indian support, is really rising in the cricketing world. The US is discovering cricket. Iceland plays very decent cricket these days. Talk to me a little bit about what really happened yesterday as far as the geopolitics of cricket is concerned as India won this major tournament, Nikhil.
Uh, Look, this is only a assertion of the power that exists in honesty. And really, what culminated yesterday was a knowledge amongst us cricket fans that we've had across formats consistently the best cricket team in the world for the last at least years, 6, 7 to 8 years. This is a team which, in the long format, has something that no other Indian team had done. In fact, no other Asian team had ever done, which is to beat Australia and Australia not once but twice. Once there may have been mitigating circumstances for because they had certain players back. But the second time around, the way we won, particularly the test match with which we won the series on the last day of the series, is one of the most fabled touches in history because, in fact, it was us who were short-handed because of the sheer level of injuries we had. And Indian bench strength had risen to such a degree, which a bench strength used to be the Australian hallmark for decades now. And Indian bench strength used to be non-existent. In fact, you could at any time in the past look at an Indian 11 and say there are at least 3 players here who just will not cut it. Right? And so this set of players, the structure of the BCCI, the structure of Indian cricket per se has been at the game without actually delivering the knockout blow. You kept repeatedly from 2017 onwards when we lost the Champions Trophy final to Pakistan in a tournament which we had dominated to a nearly embarrassing degree, to be perfectly honest. We went to the final and things just went all right. Happens. It's a one-off game. 2019 World Cup, you go into it, you look great. You've come in with much more aggressive tactics than in the past. You lose one game to England towards the end of the group phase. You go into the semi-final. Rain plays around with you a little. And there's a lovely symmetry to this. The number 240 is of great significance in June. Just keep the number 240 in mind because in the 2019 semi-final of the World Cup, we were required to chase 240 and failed. In the 2023 World Cup finals, we were winning 240 and failed. Right? And of course, Prime Minister Modi now comes back to a third term, his party having secured 240 seats. So a seminal kind of number. But even in this era of dominance that I'm talking about, at some point in the early 2020s, things started to fall apart a little bit. That 2019 World Cup loss hit us hard, reflected in the way we started to play our cricket at home, our test match cricket. And I'm going to rely on that a little bit to just establish this geopolitical problem, right? You are a dominant team. You're doing very well abroad. You qualify for the first World Test Championships. Test Championships didn't exist earlier. That was felt necessary because who is the best test team in the world used to really be an analysis of instinct rather than of hard numbers or of a tournament format. And so it was given a tournament format. And because the world calendar is such that the final can only be played in June, it could only be played in England. And the first time we played against New Zealand, we lost. The second time we played against Australia, we lost. But in the lead up, we had been the best team both times, right? Winning away and winning at home. But at home, what we had started to do was we had started to create. See, cricket is a sport of conditions. Conditions matter more than individual prowess. Individual prowess is, in fact, in terms of your capacity to handle extremely variant conditions, right? In that sense, I think the only parallel to it is golf. Tiger Woods may be as good as he can be, but if the wind picks up on a particular day, maybe there's another golfer who's better dealing with the wind. He's not able to beat that golfer, right? So in India, pitches traditionally take a lot more spin rather than seam and bounce. And because of that, what we did was we started to make pitches that were a little bit underprepared. They would turn from day one. There would be completely unpredictable bounce. There'd be completely unpredictable turn. Test matches were winding up in 2.5, 3 days. But the end result was we were winning everything at home. It sort of reflected a lack of confidence in our own abilities. Because you should be able to offer up better conditions at home and still win. Right? And that problem had started to emerge. So the narrative was starting to slip from us, even though our stats were great. Add to that the fact that you go into the 2022 T20 World Cup and the 2021 T20 World Cup. The 2021 T20 World Cup to be organized in that year because of COVID. Otherwise, it would have been organized in 2020. Two T20 World Cups within a span of around 11 months. And we were abysmal in both. We weren't bad. We were so bad that this game against Pakistan in the T21 World Cup, which was held in the UAE, which would be conditions otherwise alien to us, we lost by 10 wickets. You cannot lose by a larger margin. So with that comprehensively outplayed by New Zealand, knocked out in the group stages. We were nowhere. In the next World Cup, next edition in Australia, we went with the same set of players effectively. And we snuck through in a game against Bangladesh. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have made the semifinals. And we got the exact same pasting in the semifinals that we got against Pakistan. This time around, of course, it was England, and England turned out to be eventual champions. And at this point in time, in white ball cricket, England and Australia are looking like the preeminent powers who are playing a brand of cricket that India simply can't seem to match. India's cricket is starting. But that is where the story then it turns quite seismically. There is just enough credit that can be given to Rahul Dravid and his think tank, his managerial think tank, and then the captain Rohit Sharma. Because from there, we have played 2 World Cups and we have been by far the best team across those 2 World Cups, where our brand of cricket suddenly became something no one could live with. We lost the 2023 World Cup, 50-over World Cup final on essentially the conditions went against us a little bit, or they didn't really go against us, or we misread them. They read them better than us. That can happen sometimes in cricket. And it completely stumped us. And we did very poorly there because we set up, I would say, in my opinion, the 23 World Cup was a poor World Cup because the conditions again were too much in favor of the batsman. In the final, where we suddenly created a wicket which wasn't as free-flowing for batsmen, nullified our own strength and ended up losing the World Cup. But to this World Cup now created pitches which were fairly even. So as an example, India played 3 matches in New York. Now, New York is not a traditional cricketing venue, obviously. It was the first time that cricket reaches the United States, and that has a very important geopolitical element to it, right? India plays its games only in New York, the heart, the Big Apple, the heart of American finance. And that's where you see this huge mania. There's a temporary stadium set up in Nassau County, and the pitch is interesting. It's a difficult pitch. Bowlers are in it big time. India play Pakistan. Pakistan play the United States and lose to the United States, which is a decent enough team. India then play Pakistan on the same pitch and post a fairly low score after having had a good start. And then suddenly sneak a win because your bowlers are good enough and these wickets have enough juice in them, right? Like when I say juice, means essentially that a fast bowler will extract so much more by way of bounce and by way of movement of the ball that it becomes difficult for the batsman to score off them freely. But what we did started to reflect even in that game and that sort of group phase was something that had sometimes lacked, which was this sort of team capacity. Like everybody contributed, every just enough to go get you over the line. But on top of that, you now have, which has never been the case before, a cricketer in the form of Jasprit Bumrah, who is the preeminent fast bowler in the world today, and at least in the white ball format, given the peak that he has had over the last 9 to 10 months, perhaps in the top 5 ever. That India has never possessed before. We've had spinners like that. We've had batsmen like that. We've never had a fast bowler that you could look at and say, all right, you can bring anybody's capacities, anybody's contributions to the game from any time in history, and this boy will stack up against them. He's that good. Right. So he is sort of the fulcrum of that bowling lineup, but that bowling lineup is still very strong because in the end, he only gets to bowl 4 overs, but you've got 16 other overs to get through in a T20 format, right? And so really what changes is that maybe in terms of a geopolitical statement, maybe we were dipping in the early 2020s and the 2023 World Cup and the 24 World Cup brings it all back. And jocularly in the West, amongst the white cricket playing nations, they now call it the Asian century because they think that our depth, our depth in terms of bench strength, in terms of young cricketers, in terms of the money in the game, in terms of we are just totally dominant at this moment. But that domination needs to start reflecting in more results.
That's a great summation, and that's a great context setting on which to have the conversation. Let me pick up on one of the themes that you mentioned. We'll come to the US part in a bit, but let's talk a little bit about the BCCI itself. In our lifetime, and when you and I were boys, BCCI wasn't the biggest and the most influential and the most powerful cricketing board in the world. It has literally happened in our lifetime. Today, the BCCI is by far the most influential, the wealthiest, the most powerful cricketing board in the world. So much so that there are now complaints, as we saw in a recent video, even by Vaughan and others, that the BCCI has really become the ICC. It controls everything. Talk to me a little bit about how much of this is basically, essentially old white lament, and how much of it is, in your opinion, really true. Because there is a lot of history that when Australia and England used to essentially run everything in cricket, it wasn't that it was a very fair field at that time either. So essentially, it's just that the needle has swung, and they don't like it. Where do you stand in this debate?
This is to me, look, I consider it a matter of privilege. I'm blocked on Twitter by Michael Vaughan. Because I've never seen an ex-test match captain of a nation being the scale of whinger that this guy is. He's another level of whinging altogether. He can't. You're absolutely correct. This is the last remnants of imperial order, and they simply can't take it. But I want to give a little bit of the history of the BCCI, right? Often when the easiest take that we get in Indian cricket is we won the 1983 50 over World Cup and cricket changed forever. And that's actually not true. There is no statistical analysis that tells you that. But events that occurred that had very little to do with the fact of our winning actually influenced this. Cricket was always popular in India, but India was a poor country. And so you could keep on saying, oh, you had 600 million people, 800 million people, a billion, but who's accessing the game? Yeah. Right. So your talent pool was never going to be as broad as it became later. And that is why you become dominant later. Right. So it's very simple for the Western world to turn around and say, oh, but the day India fixes its cricket, it'll be fine. But fixing your cricket is a part of fixing your economy. You don't fix your cricket. You don't get that kind of boost into the sport without fixing your economy. Right. This is not dissimilar in certain ways to say the way the Latin powers rose in football. Right. So as Brazil got a little bit stronger, post 58, 60, 70, it suddenly started to win a lot more. In the 90s, it won a lot more. The Europeans otherwise have dominated that sport as well. Argentina has thrown a spanner in the works from time to time, but that's about it, right? Now, in cricket, this is very interesting. In 83, we win that World Cup, and it's a seismic victory because we didn't win this as underdogs. We won it as the rankest possible underdogs. Let me put that in perspective. In 79, in the World Cup in England, we lost to East Africa. Who was East Africa's team? Essentially expat Indians. So we were as bad as that. Our cricket was quite poor. The English never had any complaint about balance or fairness or anything when they had preordained themselves as the only hosts of the World Cup. So for 75 they host, 79 they host, 83 they host, and they perhaps thought this is a state of perpetuity. Right? But what happens then? This is a very interesting story. In 83, NKP Salve, who is the chief of the Board of Control for Cricket in India at that time, he goes to the final, 25th of June, 1983, and India is not expected to be there. And he asks for some passes for his fellow BCCI members, and that request is denied. And he really takes it to heart. And he decides that India is going to host the next World Cup. Now, how do you go about this? At that point in time, the ICC consisted of 21 associate members and 7 full-time members. Now, they all had 1 vote each. So there was no problem there. The problem lay in the fact that no associate would come with you unless you could dangle a carrot. So how do you dangle a carrot? You have to be able to offer them more money, right? So NKP Salve first decides on his own that he's going to do this. Somehow or the other, he's going to do this. He basically decides that he's going to go to these associates and say, look, this is how we want to host it. We will offer you 5 times more money for voting for us, right? As an outproduct of the revenues of the World Cup, not some kind of bribe, but as an outproduct of the revenues of the World Cup, your share will be 5x more than what England is offering you to allow them to host it again, or what or Australia will offer you to host it again, to host it for the first time, right? And they also offered 4x more to even the full status members. Right now, he ends up with a 16-12 victory in that vote. So India gets to host the World Cup. Now, the problem is, by the end of 1984, the money has to go in. Now, Indira Gandhi has just hosted the Asian Games, and she loves this idea. But Indira sadly gets assassinated on the 31st of October, 1984. You're like 2 months away from your payment date. Rajiv comes to power, and Rajiv and the Ambanis don't have much of a relationship. Right? And now, so on the one side, NKP Salve has been trying to feed this into Dhirubhai that, look, you can take this opportunity, become a bigger name, become a huge name. We'll make this World Cup all about you. And that's why they called it the Reliance World Cup in 1987, much as the English used to call it the Prudential Cup, the Prudential World Cup throughout 75, 79, and 83, because Prudential used to sponsor it. Right? So this was par for the course. But Rajiv and the Ambanis, and this is all from a Business Standard article that I've read, Rajiv and the Ambanis did not have a great relationship. VP Singh was finance minister, and VP Singh had told his income tax department to keep an eye on Reliance and that he's going to go after them, right? Bear in mind, these are days where the money is going to turn the day you can actually sell TV rights, right? Bear in mind, till even 1992, when Doordarshan had a monopoly on TV rights, BCCI used to actually pay Doordarshan to be able to telecast a match, and not the other way around. So BCCI used to pay Doordarshan for each match that it telecasts of cricket, so as to create greater awareness for cricket. But the Reliance World Cup changed a lot of that. Now, we have a 2-month period left to deposit this money. Suddenly, VP Singh finds himself no longer finance minister and is moved and is promoted to become home minister. Immediately, NKP Salve gives a call to the Ambanis and says, look, we need you to put in the 5.5 crores that we need to pay out immediately, right? And you're going to get the full hosting rights. Your names will be everywhere. And one part of the contract is you choose what advertising banners will be on what part of the stadium. Right? So this is still the, the era of stable banners, not these flash banners that we get anymore, that we get nowadays. And, it's not as if you have even the rope, the boundary rope, right? Like all that, none of this had happened as yet. and you used to literally paint the name of the sponsor onto the ground.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
None of that, none of the clean stuff that we have now. It was all rubbish at that time, right? So you had to, it was a huge deal to get all of this. So the Ambanis jumped in, decided that the moment, but he put one condition, and this is classic Dhirubhai. And this will give you recall of what he did with Bill Clinton as well. Okay, he says, I will host this on the condition, we'll do all of this on the condition that in the warm-up game before the 1987 World Cup between India and Pakistan, that warm-up game, I get to sit with Rajiv Gandhi. Right? This is classically what he did with Bill Clinton as well, where he feigned ill health and he got to sit while Bill was standing in a photograph that was taken with the Ambanis. Now, bear in mind, this is a time at which India and Pakistan, it's their elites that are running these boards. So their relationships are actually deep. So it's a co-hosted World Cup between India and Pakistan. And without that co-hosting, it couldn't have actually happened. You couldn't have shifted the venues. You couldn't have got the votes together. So that's how you manage to bring it into India. And that really changes things big time, because that starts changing the contracts between the BCCI and the television companies. And even the World Cup apart, the World Cup actually sold TV rights, did very well, was a financial success. And often these kinds of sporting events are financial failures. But this was a big financial success. Because of which, eventually in the 90s, what happens is that there's an England tour to India. This is a long format tour, six ODIs.
Before you go, take the story forward. Allow me to ask you one question. As you tell this story about how Mr. Salve was insulted in the Western world and made up his mind to bring the sport out of the white world, so to speak, into, my apologies, into the Asian context, into South Asia, into India, one cannot but be reminded of Mr. Tata being turned away from a hotel in South Bombay and deciding to build what we today know as the iconic Taj, opposite the Gateway of India. The parallels are incredible, right? And this shift of power, the demonstration of shift of power, in a sense, from a colonial mindset. You mentioned how the elites ran this entire program. Moving to a more democratic, more egalitarian scenario with perhaps you can tell that story next, perhaps with players coming from more egalitarian backgrounds.
It's all going to sequentially fit in. Look, you can say what you would like about the emotional attachment of a sport to a population. You don't start succeeding in it. It doesn't start spreading till the money comes in. It's as simple as that. Right? We all played cricket growing up. I don't know how many countless hours of this sport that I played. And we used to play in so many different ways. So when you hear these childhood stories of Gavaskar saying, oh, I had to play in a gully where my straight drive is so good because you were not allowed to play on the square of the wicket. Because if you played square of the wicket, you would get out. So you had to play straight. We all played that format in some form or the other. We played other formats also, smaller grounds, where you're only allowed to play square of the wicket. You're not allowed to play straight because somebody's window is up there. All that is great, but that does not convert you into an international cricketing force until the money comes in. And that TWI contract's a big one. England come to tour India on a 3 test match and 6 ODI series. And for the first time, Trans World International bids for the rights. And what this allows the BCCI to do is to sell rights to TWI and actually turn to Doordarshan and say, you're also going to be paying us for matches. Right? Later on, free to air comes in through the Prasar Bharati Act, different matter, so that everybody can watch games on Doordarshan, because at times Doordarshan wasn't rich enough to bid for Indian cricket, and therefore Indian matches would not be telecast to the entire population. Different matter. But that's actually only another story of how far the BCCI converted all of this. You got a lot of astute businessmen at the top of the BCCI who started playing this game. So from that one tour, the BCCI makes $600,000, right? And that's a huge amount for that time. A huge amount in the context of how Indian cricket will develop. Now, bear in mind, at this time, India, of course, has traditional roots in the game.
It's amazing that you mentioned $600,000, Nikhil, because compared to the kind of money cricket has today.
Yeah. Okay. BCCI today is a $2.5 billion organization. Right? That's what I'm talking about. This is 30 years ago. Right? There's no great sort of depth in your power that you lent on. You built this from scratch, right? So at that time, what used to happen was the local state boards were quite powerful because they used to own the stadium in their own state. Every state had maybe one, perhaps certain states had two major stadiums, right? They were all owned by the BCCI, and the BCCI would then, well, they were all owned by the local association, right? And the BCCI would then pay them for hosting a test and so on and so forth, right? Or they'd have this payment sharing mechanism at the gate receipt and the TV receipts. So there was a huge sort of line to try and host. And the good thing with India because of this is we've developed, I mean, there are easily 20 stadiums in India that can host international cricket quite well and have very varied conditions, right? Different matter. I have certain complaints about how our grounds are today and all of that. It's a different matter. But largely speaking, our facilities went into overdrive. And through the 90s, that was not the case. Through the 90s, this is all just sort of developing. It's getting better and better.
So, Nikhil, when this money starts to come in through television rights,
I just want to
is
add
this
one
when
thing to the
the
money. I just
yeah,
want to add one thing.
absolutely. But I just want to add a question there. Is this also when the fulcrum of power begins to shift?
Most certainly, because so now we add in more associate members into the ICC, and they are going to vote with us, right? That's one element. But with this, add in one very, very big X factor, and that X factor is Sachin Ramesh Tendulkar. This is like Michael Jordan arriving at the scene, right? Or it's like Pele or Maradona arriving at the scene just when it's about to explode, and he doesn't let you down. That's the key, right? They invest in him big time. But this kid is the real deal. He is, everybody across the world objectively says the best thing that they've seen. They've not seen batsmanship this clean before, right? Not since Bradman. I mean, Bradman himself saying this guy's as good as I was. And of course, he made a lot of money of his own, but he changed the face of Indian cricket because advertising money just went from everywhere and went surging into Indian cricket. Suddenly, cricketers were more important sponsors than film stars, and that never used to be the case in India. Right? Forget about competing with other sports. Other sports were never going to compete with cricket. But even your other sort of iconic industry is Bollywood, and Bollywood had no chance of competing with cricketers anymore, right? So with that, in the mid-90s, you suddenly get Ganguly and Dravid and Kumble, and it sort of starts, the engine starts whirring even faster and faster. And then you get up with Sehwag and Yuvraj and Harbhajan, and these India-Australia tours suddenly become the thing. And you get an iconic series in 2001, after which Indian cricket has arrived. In this backdrop, there's a remarkable series played in 2007 in Australia, right? And you want to talk about power shift. You want to talk about how big time it shifted and how much the white people, the white playing countries of this sport realize, oh shit, this is out of our hands now. There's a famous Sydney Test match in 2007, which is notoriously named as Monkey Gate. What happens in this Test match is India get awful decisions from Steve Bucknor. Steve Bucknor has spent a decade giving India awful decisions. Right? Like he has literally taken 5 runs off Tendulkar's average. I can tell you this without overstating it. I mean, it's ridiculous what the man did. I've seen him give caught behinds when the ball is that far away from the bat. Yeah, it's ludicrous. So and at that time there was no video umpire, nothing to these kinds of calls. Video umpiring, of course, already existed for line calls such as runouts and stumpings since '93, but not to these kinds of calls. So once he raises the finger, that's the end of that, and you have to, with dignity, walk away. In 2007, we get the real rough end of the deal in the first inning. When we don't get that, I think we come out on top in that series. Because already India has played a series in 2004 in Australia, which is a drawn series. The first time India has drawn a series in Australia. And the Aussies know this is their dominant era. This is their greatest ever team. This is a team that is so good with the likes of Glenn McGrath and Shane Warne and Steve Waugh and Ricky Ponting at their peak, that they are comparing this as being better than the old Australians, Bradman's Australians, better than the West Indians. Like this is the real deal. This is the greatest dominating force in cricket. But there's one problem. These bastard Indians keep beating you from time to time. And over a 10, 12, 15-year period, we actually walk away with a winning record in most formats, right? But we lose some big matches. We lose the 2003 World Cup final. The 2004 Test series, on the last day in Sydney, We don't get a plum LBW against Steve Waugh, which would have opened up the Australian lineup and perhaps allowed us to win that series in Australia for the first time. Plum LBW, I mean, just not given. And again, Steve Bucknor, like you trust like clockwork. Anyway, Andrew Symonds was at the heart of this controversy in 2007, where he was LBW once, caught behind once, and Steve Bucknor gave neither. And when Harbhajan Singh and Sachin Tendulkar were batting at the crease, what had happened in the series prior when the Aussies had come to tour India was Andrew Symonds was an outsized personality. He sadly passed away. And literally passed away of a broken heart. After Shane Warne passed away, was one of his greatest friends. He passed away shortly after in some tragic incident. But he was targeted by the Indian crowds very shamefully with racist taunts, monkey taunts. Right. And this happened in Bombay. And it was, you can't deny this. It's on video, crystal clear. You can see stand after stand making monkey chants when he's coming out to bat or when he's batting. And this was, it was in fact picked up because some of these are educated crowds. This is picked up from European football. European football had a major problem through the 2000s in Spain and in Italy in particular of racial taunts towards black players. So the same taunts were brought in here. And it is the Australian side that during a, cricket sledging is quite common. That is, both teams will be talking to each other and abusing each other. Abuse is perhaps, it's not so much abuse as taunting each other. And sometimes it can travel to abuse. But the idea is to destabilize the mentality of the other, right? And the allegation is that that Harbhajan Singh called Andrew Symonds a monkey, right? An entire inquiry sits. Sachin Tendulkar goes into the to give evidence and says, no, he didn't say monkey. He said the Punjabi gali maki. Right? Brahman brain at full overdrive. When that test match ends, so much unfairness happens even on the last day that it's quite incredible that an Indian captain sits in an Australian press conference and says only one team played in the spirit of the game, harking back to the exact same statement made by an Australian captain when Bodyline was first started. So this is like, these boys knew what they were up to, right? And the Aussies ordinarily would be up in arms. They'd be bringing the book down on you, and they suddenly realize, we can't fucking do a thing. We can't do a thing, right? It was a New Zealand-led inquiry committee, and they said this is inconclusive. We can't do anything about it. And that's how Harbhajan Singh gets away with it, right? And to that series had, but it's one of my favorite series because I love cricket when it has a warlike atmosphere, like attrition to the core. I mean, Matthew Hayden gave an interview to an Australian radio channel calling Harbhajan Singh a noxious weed. This was not, we were not, and at the same time, we were creating a new team. Some of our older players were going away, particularly ODI team. And we went and won the ODI series, the traditionally held tri-series. The last time a tri-series is ever held in Australia, we went and won it. And we had never won it before. In fact, they had barely ever lost to foreign teams before. Maybe once or twice they'd lost to foreign teams before. That's about it. So we had never won it before, and we did that time. So it just put everything into perspective. We went back in 2011, Virat Kohli, young buck. We are getting rolled over because now it was time for us to replace our team. Our elder players were not able to cope, and we were getting whitewashed. The crowd is giving him pelters. And this is when these cameras start coming in and these microphones start coming in. And you realize for decades, Indian teams have suffered heinous racial abuse of the boundary line, particularly from Australian fans, right? Virat being Virat, and this is why some of us absolutely turns around and gives them the middle finger. And he gets fined for it. But the tonality of what it means to be an Indian cricketer has changed. Right? There's
some of this already began with people like Saurav Ganguly, right? I mean,
Dada is the precursor, bro. You may not like me say, Dada is the greatest Bengali ever born, man. I'm telling you, because Dada changed the face of what we are as a cricketing nation. Dada will forever be my captain. I mean, I know they talk about Dhoni and Virat and Rohit, and they're great captains, no doubt about it. But Dada took us from the throes of match fixing. You were in the midst of match fixing to create a clean team and a very competitive team. Right.
Also in a sense that he had the body language of not being subservient.
Oh, he was
Because we're
worse.
talking about power. Even
He-
Tendulkar was a very genteel body language, right?
look,
Saurav
let's be clear.
Ganguly,
With Tendulkar, nobody's messing around anyway,
correct, correct.
right?
Because of how good he is, yes.
That's right. Nobody's messing around with him. They decided very early on in his career that don't sledge this guy, he'll kill you. Once he loses his shit, he's like McEnroe. When he gets angry, he actually gets more focused. Right? So just
Correct.
don't bother him. Let him be in his shell. But Dada wasn't like when you say he would stand up, it's not that. It's not defiance. And Dada is he's counter punching and he's counter punching hard. It's almost like Ali in a corner, dodging those punches, and then when he gives you one, he gives you hard. And it's done in the most deliberate, disrespectful way. Stuff like making Steve Waugh wait for 10 minutes at the toss. Yeah, I'm coming, I'm coming. I mean, this is not done. This is not done. This is a gentleman's game. It's not done in international cricket. Just letting him know who the boss is. Boss, you're in India. You're playing us. I'll come for the toss when I'm good and ready. All right. So, that power equation is starting to move, and the world is starting to take note of the fact that we won't take shit anymore. And then Virat, of course, once he arrives, takes it to higher levels. He is so much more aggressive, right? And now the whinging has now, this is when the whinging starts because the money has now changed to an enormous degree. These
Of
contracts
course,
are
Nikhil, when you were talking about Saurav Ganguly and Tendulkar and the monkey so-called monkey gate incidents and so forth, that's also when satellite television is really roaring
right.
into
So
India.
I wanted to now, so that's the
Yeah.
cricketing side. I wanted to give you the parallel through the 90s of this. Satellite television started to roar. And what happens is BCCI, like I said, was being run by very sharp, astute businessmen. They are able to slice and dice cricketing. It's not just like, oh, global rights for Indian cricket. No. Indian cricket will play certain matches, X number of matches a year at neutral venues. That's a separate contract. Indian cricket in India is a separate contract. Indian cricket abroad is a separate contract, right? And it has revenue sharing with various boards. And that's how Indian money is starting to run the game. In fact, completely runs the game,
I
right?
remember, Nikhil, and perhaps you could throw some light on this. I remember Star getting the contract to broadcast Indian cricket, which was a really big deal.
R got it, then Nimbus jumped in, then Sony jumped in, and then the IPL arrived in 2008. And that's it. That's where the money game ends there. Because from now, nobody can catch up. That league is going to match the English Premier League and the NBA in terms of the scale of profits.
IPL in just a moment, Nikhil, but I want you to reflect a little more about the changing tide of cricket. This is also the time, Nikhil, perhaps when India is breaking out from the India-Pakistan coupling. In international relations, we talk about how India decoupled. India did its nuclear tests, and so did Pakistan. And then, at some point, the growth of the Indian economy and the failure of Pakistan became so stark that India, in a sense, decoupled, even in American imagination. Is India starting to decouple by around this time?
Yeah, it is. And also add to that the fact that cricket in Pakistan was banned. Nobody visited Pakistan, right? So there are no bilateral series. Sporadically in the 2000 bilateral series were conducted. India went to Pakistan in 2004 and for the first time beat them in a test series and ODI series there. They came to India in 2006, 2005, 6, and they beat us, I think, in India, or at least drew the series in India. But that's it. After that, there's no match. All this Aman Ki Asha and all went down the drain. The story of international cricket since the start of the millennium is India v Australia. All right. Because England was a very weak team at that time. And England then started to get stronger over time. And now it's three teams that you look at who are capable of winning any tournament. So in a sense, cricket has suffered for this variance as well. The advent of T20 meant that suddenly players didn't have to strive. Playing test cricket is hard work, especially if you're a fast bowler, it's hard work. Bowling 15 overs a day for 5 days, it's a lot of work, maybe sometimes more overs than that. Here you're bowling 4 overs in a 2-hour game, 3-hour game, and you're getting paid much more. Right. So foreign boards in particular, the West Indies realized this is a huge problem for them because they were losing players. Players said we simply won't contract with the West Indies. Therefore, they can't be picked for the national West Indian team. Right. And it's not even a nation, really. It's a fiction for the purpose of cricket. We will not be selected for that team. Instead, they were playing like mercenary cricketers, playing various T20 leagues across the world to make money.
Let's come to
Right?
IPL now, Nikhil. IPL again, then after all the satellite television, all of that, IPL then is again a moment, right? And talk a little bit about Lalit Modi, because in a sense, Lalit Modi also had this sort of defiance, right, against ICC, against old rules. There was something happening even with Lalit Modi, the character, as he brought about this thing called IPL.
The funny thing with Lalit Modi is he's such a slippery character. That he has been on every side of the political divide, as you had to be if you were an administrator of cricket in India, because when Sharad Pawar was to be appointed head of the BCCI and the ICC, a whip was issued to all persons associated with the Congress in these boards, these local state boards, that they must vote for Sharad Pawar, and that whip came from no one other than Sonia Gandhi. And that's what we're talking about here. So when they talk about Jay Shah today, Jay Shah's actually done 10 years of cricket in Gujarat and then come forward. All right, you call him a nepo baby, I'll even give you that. But nothing was as this entire sport has been nepotistic during that time. Every sport in India has been nepotistic during that time. Be that as it may. So Lalit Modi now has there is rumor of him having conducted some kind of land scam in Jaipur and in Rajasthan and made a lot of money from it. Right. So now he's into the Rajasthan Cricket Board. From there, he starts currying favor and getting close into the BCCI. Now, there is a civil suit pending in the Delhi High Court, where Z has claimed that, in fact, this entire league format idea was theirs, and the BCCI acted in an anti-competitive manner by literally scuttling the ICL, that was their Indian Cricket League, by disallowing players from playing in it. In other words, if you played for the ICL, which are, for example, players like Ambati Rayudu did, because they were getting money initially from there, you could not play for the Indian team. You would not be selected, right?
Well, Dave for a time was associated with ICL, isn't it?
Everybody was. It was a Z-led venture, so it seemed like a legitimate venture, and nobody knew, right, how the BCCI will react. Well, that's how the BCCI reacted. That suit's pending, be that as it may. But Lalit Modi has nothing stopping him, and he creates the entire aura and the drama and the structure around the IPL initially, right? And I mean, it's a spectacular Big Bang entry. It's not just a tournament that came in, right? Like, look at the idea. He wanted 4, 5 major Bollywood stars to be co-owners, to be the face of the franchises in the IPL, right? And yet the first IPL is won by Shane Warne's team, which play Moneyball cricket, right? It's incredible. It's a great story. And from there, he is ousted by the BCCI so savagely and so badly with match fixing allegations and other conflict of interest allegations that he's no longer in a long time, right? And N. Srinivasan takes over, and eventually N. Srinivasan is ousted as well. But it is a story of very sharp businessman after businessman coming in and taking over and making this brand bigger and bigger and bigger. Right. So the last 10-year contract that Sony signed for the IPL in 2018 is a $1.63 billion contract. And it's going to get bigger.
Nikhil, with all of this,
in fact, to the IPL, let me add one other element. The international calendar used to be holy grail, right? Like, if you played cricket in Australia, you played it in the Australian summer, which is the Indian winter. If you played cricket in India, you played in the Indian winter, not in the Indian summer or spring. If you played in England, you played in the English summer. If you played in the West Indies, it would generally be from July, August onwards. If you played in Sri Lanka was similar. And these calendars have been thrown off completely because the IPL goes and says, whatever the hell you may want to do, we are taking 3 months. Right? And okay, IPL today is generous enough to take those 3 months, 2.5, 3 months in the early Indian summer and through the Indian summer. But eventually, if it gets too big, it might be the one saying, no, we're going to play in the Indian winter, in which case the Indian test calendar would be completely skewed. So BCCI has done this job, at least, that it has balanced out sort of the test calendar and the T20 calendar. But one thing that has happened, Hindol, with the explosion in T20 cricket, and bear in mind, T20 was created actually in England, is these surrounding teams have started to get weaker. There are a number of South African players that are no longer accessible. A number of West Indians who will not play for the West Indies. New Zealand players who are quitting before their time. right? Just to make money because money is imperative for them. That the Australian and the English boards are still rich enough that their players don't need to do this, but some of them, even some of them have retired and said we'll only be playing T20 cricket. And now T20 cricket, these franchises are co-owning other teams in other T20 leagues, right? So they are now signing players on a global contract. That you are contracted to the Mumbai Indians, and we have franchise teams in the UAE, we have franchise teams in the American League, in the West Indies League, in perhaps even Australia, and you will play for our team wherever we may play. That kind of format will sort of threaten cricket a little bit more. The other thing it did is, my perception as a cricket fan is that it completely altered the quality of pitches, at least in the subcontinent. We're just seeing very flat, very bare tracks. Just, the last IPL that we watched, scores of 250 and above of 20 overs had, I wouldn't say become commonplace, but they occurred way more than they really should. And it's an absurdity to be batting at 12 and over in cricket. And in contrast, in the World Cup, I think 200 was breached only once, right? So really speaking, there's a few things to iron out, there's a few things to sort out, but you can't stop this league anymore. I mean, people like me who don't watch it much, who don't care for it much, I've given up. I know there's no stopping it.
Well, of course, this has altered, as you're saying, the entire. I mean, would you say that cricket today is one of the most powerful tools of Indian soft power? So much so that, such is its might, that it almost sounds like hard power in some certain ways, right? I mean, of course, not military hard power, but just sheer economic power. It has completely altered a global game. Also, reflect upon the fact that completely new teams are emerging. I mean, the Afghanistan team, for instance, has an Indian coach. I want you to reflect upon that. I believe has been supported by India. Also, the US team is, in fact, de facto a bunch of Indians, NRIs, diaspora Indians playing for the US. Reflect a little bit about those
Yeah.
changes. Iceland,
Yeah.
another emerging team.
This is something that the Western powers never did to this degree. I mean, once cricket has come into the hands of the BCCI, there is no dispute. Nepal are a heck of a team, man. Nepal are a nation of what size? Right? They pushed the South Africans so close in this game. The T20 format allows the disparity of quality between teams to collapse, particularly with certain kinds of conditions. Right? It allows it to collapse. We talk about Afghanistan first up, right? We haven't so much as helped Afghanistan as pretty much created this team, because their base has been Noida. They played all their cricket there. They trained there. They're given all the facilities there. They've been given, so many Afghan players are in the IPL. They really don't have much of a domestic structure. They try and sort of have a domestic structure. And this has allowed us perhaps to even have a conversational wedge with the Taliban, even when they've come to us. The Taliban have not restricted the Afghan cricket team in any way at any point in time. Yeah, of course, they'll have their diktats. You must have a beard and stuff like that. That's a different matter. But they haven't really interfered because this is a cash cow. And this is a good relationship. Geopolitically, if you think of it, for the Talibanis, they're looking at it and saying, all right, stay with India, right? Because the real problem is the sandwich nation in the middle. That's the one that neither country is able to deal with, right? And so you will see a lot of hand wringing, is like a kind way of putting it, on Pakistani news channels and YouTube about how the Afghans have betrayed them, despite the fact that we took in so many of their refugees, etc. Right? So that is an element of the power that you're talking about. It sort of has that somewhat of an influence. In Australia, I mean, Australia know that when India come, right, you have to play the longest possible series because that's when you're going to make the most money. India was never, in all of Australian cricketing history, given 5 test matches. England was never given 5 tests. England had never given India 5 test matches. But when they used to play each other, they used to play only 5 test matches. Right? Now it's mandatory. When India play Australia, or England play Australia, or England play India, it is 5 test matches, whether it is home or away. Right? So that's a stature change that immediately occurs. And that means that's because they are really drawing in on the Indian money that comes in. And so now you will see interview after interview by Australian cricketers and some English cricketers saying, what a great country India is and how wonderful the culture is. And, the tune starts changing big time. The first two to actually jump onto this bandwagon. First was Steve Waugh, but Steve Waugh did it from a great place. Like he literally said, we've not been able to win in India because we go to India with a hostile mindset. He said, I want to embrace India. And that is when, for example, he started setting up his charities in Calcutta, right? And the other was Brett Lee, who took to Bollywood. Actually had a song with Asha Parekh at one point in time, right? Where he's playing the guitar. It gets teased a lot about that in Australia. But that's sort of the shift that starts happening. Countries like South Africa will always vote with India. There's a very close committee with South Africa. And so the more and more of these associate member states arise and arrive, the better Indian power actually even becomes.
Well, has that tonality of, well, we need the money, we're going to say good things about India, changing a little bit as more and more people begin to whine a little bit, BCCI is too powerful, or are these stray voices?
Stray voices. Stray voices. Look, you can't fight the power. Can't fight the. Listen, when you are this powerful, you should not win. You should not worry about stray voices. It's going to happen. I mean, why should it not happen? You'd be doing it too, yeah. Let's be clear, right? So there should never be a complaint about these things. It is going.
A
It
little
is
bit.
evidence of the fact that you're doing well.
Talk a little bit about the US team. I'm fascinated because of the power.
You mentioned that it is a team of expats. You're right, but I was surprised to find that 5 or 6 of their very prominent players are actually born in the United States.
It's in
And
Indian families.
no, they're so Aaron Jones is not an Indian family. Aaron
That's right.
Jones,
Yeah.
I believe African American. He may be Caribbean American. I'm not sure, but I believe African American, born in Brooklyn. There's a few more. I mean, look, America's never going to take to cricket, T20 cricket, the way they take to baseball. Baseball is in their culture. It's a deeper thing. But America has so much money, so many avenues for sport. And once they decide that they want to do something well, they will do it so bloody well that they'll be enough, right? Like even soccer, as the Americans call it, or football. America will never dominate that arena. And America will never be able to pick up that many talented players for that pool, right? Even though it is the most commonly played sport at the teenage level, and particularly with girls, and that's why their women's soccer team is exceptional.
That's right.
But you could easily have, at least in certain parts of the United States, particularly say New Jersey or Florida or California, perhaps even Texas, where there are large Asian expat populations, large even English expat populations, South African populations, where you could have miniature leagues or you could have a program at college level or school level or something or the other, and that might lead to more of a growth. But yeah, I mean, they you could see it even in this first time. The Americans had a proper team. Like this Netravalkar, the bowler who created all the damage for them,
Yes.
he was an under 21 bowler for India. Never had a prospect to play for India. So he quit that, became a software engineer, moves to America, and is suddenly bowling to Virat Kohli and getting him out in the mirror image dismissal that he got him all those years. So these are great stories.
Amazing. Yeah. And also, that great story about Krishan Maharaj, the player who came to, and went to Hindu temples, who was widely photographed, the South African player.
Ah, 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 ah. So
Talk to me a little bit about the Iceland team, Nikhil. That's the other very interesting.
I think they're right now they're a bit shits and giggles, to be perfectly honest. But they play. So Iceland, they have a team. They enjoy their online position. Their online presence is actually quite
Yeah.
funny. They poke
Yeah.
fun at everyone.
Yeah.
They play matches through the European leagues. The Dutch have always had a history of cricket. Never a prominent history, but the Dutch have always played cricket. The Irish have, the Scots have. So the Icelandic team tends to play with them, but they haven't had an outsized contribution as yet, or outsized achievement as yet. Unlike the others, the Irish have beaten England in a World Cup. Holland has made it its duty to beat South Africa every single time that they play them, literally. And just South Africa's literally escaped by the skin of their teeth even this time. And Holland had beaten England a couple of times as well prior. So, these are not nations that I look at the way I look at, say, Zimbabwe, which, but for sort of certain unfortunate political events, I mean, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Zimbabwe had a banger of a cricket team. Heck of a cricket team. So much talent. A part of that was South Africans who had moved into Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe created its own natural talent quite a bit and lost a lot of that natural talent to England.
Nikhil, do you think the BCCI now understands how powerful its soft power is for India, and does things with it which are strategic? Afghanistan was a great example. Do you think they're looking to do other things that are that strategic? And I also want you to reflect upon another thing. As India rises, the great India-Pakistan rivalry has also collapsed. I mean, the Pakistan team is in shambles, the economy is in shambles. The distance and the divide has widened between Pakistan too in cricket. Do you think, in that sense, the BCCI makes use of that gulf also? So, in that sense, do you think it has a sense of its power and its ability to wield that power?
Firstly, on the Pakistan question, to be perfectly honest, I think Pakistan is not really within the material frame of the BCCI. And you're right, their talent levels have collapsed, but that was bound to happen when you don't get to keep playing cricket at home. It was bound to happen. But the BCCI has a very interesting position with Pakistan, because you can't deny that this is a sport that is not played by enough nations at the highest possible level, right? And what I'm trying to point out for quite some time now during this conversation, Hindol, is the depth in terms of the capacity of teams to beat each other is actually a lot lower. Right? So when a World Cup happens, I'm thinking there cannot be a winner outside of India, South Africa, India, England, or Australia. Yes, some kind of spanner can be thrown in the works by one team that might make the final. Pakistan made it in between. South Africa made it this time because the Afghans, in conditions that are suitable to them, managed to beat the Aussies, and we also beat the Aussies. But really speaking, outside of these three teams, you don't expect a victor. New Zealand sometimes will punch above their weight, but that's about it. That was not necessarily the expectation or the case earlier, right? Even though the Aussies were dominant in ODI cricket in the ODI World Cup, but that was on the back of a team that was truly something different.
That's right.
Now, this team doesn't need to be all that great to basically be beating almost everybody, and then really between India, England, and Australia, you sort yourselves out on the given day, right? So it's a very different thing. So that's a balance that may be a little tricky, and that's a bleeding of players from various places. So to that, if you add it from various countries, from their sort of national cricketing agenda towards T20 cricket, towards franchise cricket, and moving away, and therefore losing a lot of talent to what can be in your test team and what can Sri Lanka is. I've never seen Sri Lanka so weak. They're not a material player.
Well, I mean, in our lifetime, and when we were boys, I mean, the Sri Lankan team was really formidable.
Look, from 96
remember all the great Sri Lankan players.
From 96 to 2011, they've been superlative. Absolutely brilliant, particularly in ODI cricket and at home in Test cricket, and starting to make inroads in their global performances in Test cricket. And whatever you may say, they produced a few genuine global megastars. Muthiah Muralitharan, Kumar Sangakkara, Aravinda De Silva, genuinely great batsman. I mean, top-notch technician. So they Jayasuriya, oh my God, Sanat Jayasuriya, one of the greats of the ODI game, the white ball game. So that's sort of dissipating now, and you see the same thing with Pakistan. So now you end up with certain questions that become very difficult. Now Pakistan is really relying on the fact that actually this is still a democratic system within the ICC, and you get to host tournaments on a rotational basis. Now, on that rotational basis, at the end of this year, Pakistan is supposed to be able to host what is called as the Champions Trophy, which is almost like a 50-over World Cup, with almost as big as a 50-over World Cup, not quite that scale, but it's got almost all the major teams in the world. Now, they are supposed to be hosting it, but if India continues its boycott of playing Pakistan, that tournament can't go through, right? So Pakistan at that moment in time had the right to host it exclusively. But now what you're going to end up doing, which you did with the Asia Cup, perhaps is the only solution, is okay, the India matches will have to be played in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh, whatever you choose, right? And if India make the final, then that final cannot be in Pakistan. Right? So that is a flexion. That is a flexion that we also come up with. But you can keep doing this, and I'm never going to say play with Pakistan. I have too deeper understanding of what Pakistan does with us to say that we should be giving them any kind of backing whatsoever. But if I look at it purely from a cricketing lens, if Pakistan also starts falling off the cliff the way it is, then that inter-competitive, that intra-country rivalry across the entire cricketing spectrum, that's really coming down big time, man.
To my last question, Nikhil, because the BCCI and India is in such a dominant position now in cricket, it has the money, it has the levers, it has the audience. What more could BCCI do which would be positive to advance India's soft power, not just in the game, but broadly? Do you think? I mean, you're really a passionate cricket, commentator, somebody who researches really cricket. What more could the BCCI do?
See, I think self-flagellation is a very Indian trait. And so we tend to really go hard at the BCCI for some of its decisions. An example being today, the latest set of contracts with the ICC, uh, the BCCI will get 39% of all revenue. In a multiple country system, that's quite outsized, right? But the BCCI's answer is, yes, it's 39% to us, but look at the scale to which we've increased the pie. Right. So what you're getting, you're not able to handle that kind of money. That's the amount that we're getting to you. Right. Now, BCCI may have to ask itself, does it need to have almost like a welfare-ish intervention into certain countries for the preservation of Test cricket, and will it prioritize the preservation of Test cricket? And I'm telling you right now, if you did this purely from a corporate commercial angle, there'd be very few takers who'd say we need to prioritize Test cricket at all, other than the fact that when you as junior cricketers are training to become a cricketer, you can't train to become straight away a T20 cricketer. Your skill set will not develop enough. Right? So the quality of the spectacle will drop. So you have to train actually for this longer format. Because your entire range of skill sets must arrive before you can start honing them into these sharper skill sets. That's at least the assumption of coaching today. That assumption may fall apart tomorrow. I don't know, Hindor. But that's the assumption today, that you can't do without the basics. Right? And these basics require rigor. And this is a sport. You don't get taught them and then not go through thousands of hours, thousands upon thousands of hours of playing them out fully before you become anything. So very simply put, if you don't have a defense, you can't have an attack. Right? But maybe batsmen now are thinking, screw this. If the IPL was any evidence, then the idea was screw defense. Right? But those kinds of conditions were not prevalent in the World Cup. And if you didn't have a defense in the World Cup, God help you. Right? So let's see how all of this develops. And maybe that's one line where BCCI will have to see, what do we do? And I'm particularly pointing, what do we do about how Test cricket will be handled in Pakistan, in South Africa, in West Indies? And are you looking at the induction of some of the lesser countries into Test cricket? Really, that is a system that has always failed, because Test cricket being a 5-day format, the gap in skill set is just too much. You cannot, the Afghans may be very good in T20 and ODI and may push us close. They are not going to even stand in front of us in a 5-day format. They're not coming close to us even for a single innings in a 5-day format. It's not possible. Right? So this is sort of where the dilemma lies. And the two-tier structure is really what is prevalent today. That's fine. It's prevalent. That's great. But that's not going to create more good level rivalries at the top end. So are we, jocularly, when I'm more critical of this, especially with friends, I just said the last 10 years or 8 years has been the era of the Commonwealth of cricket in the narrowest form. India, Australia, England, and beyond that, you can't even get a competitive series. This can't even get that. You may have the sporadic occasion. Okay, the West Indies went to Australia this time and were able to pull off a miraculous test win. Pakistan went to Australia, pushed them close, didn't get a test win, but pushed them really close. All right, that's fun. That looks good. Maybe. England, naturally, those conditions are probably the most favorable for all teams, the most varied conditions, more accommodating conditions. So India does well there, other teams do well there. But on the whole, the English are also too strong in their own conditions. So it's not really something where I look at that beyond these three teams, there's much competitiveness. That's maybe the thing to look at.
Wonderful.
And then to relate that to soft power, maybe that is sort of the reflection of the Indian ethos of justice, right? Like, we need everybody to grow. We will never create a system in which only we grow, because what's the point of growing alone? There's no point in growing alone.
No, quite right. And for a sports fan, as also, you want to see real competition. There's no point seeing endless one-sided matches.
There's no point. See, why was this so sweet? Because we lost so much. Yeah, until you lose, the victory isn't sweet.
Well, I hope BCCI is listening closely to you, Nikhil. Thanks very much for explaining this in such great detail. Truly, you're a reservoir of information and research on cricket, and it's all at the tip of your fingers. BCCI cricket, as Nikhil explained, one of the most potent soft power tools of India. Beyond all of this, of course, Nikhil and I will be celebrating with millions of Indians that India has finally
I just
won
want to add
a
something.
T20
Perhaps your
World Cup.
focus on the idea of soft power, I don't really have a comprehension of soft power. I don't understand IR well enough like you do to really understand soft power in that sense. But yes, to the extent that there are certain mechanisms that are clearly and visibly at play, perhaps those reflect a certain soft power. To
Yes.
me, they are not, to our limited domain of the nations within cricket. All right, maybe they reflect a certain thing. But you're not entering into a quad relationship with Australia because India is suddenly a cricketing power. I mean, let's be rational about how far any of this travels.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nikhil. At least we should celebrate the fact that India has, as I was saying, won another T20 World
Absolutely.
Cup.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a great way to say farewell to two of our legends.
Yes, Rohit and Virat Kohli. Thank you very much, Nikhil, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Indo.